Lisa with Craft Your Practice, and welcome to episode 23 Setting Limits Without Feeling Like the Bad Guy. How to hold a limit and stay kind at the same time. Most therapists I talk to don't actually struggle to know where their limit should be. They know the cancellation policy should hold, they know the fee needs to go up, and they know the Saturday text can't keep getting answered. So the limit is not the hard part. The hard part is the feeling that comes with holding it and the sense that a real boundary makes you the difficult one and the unkind one and the bad guy. And today I want to take that feeling apart because it's the thing that's standing between you and the practice that you can actually keep. We're going to look at why this hits therapists so hard, why kindness and limits were never opposites, and how to set a limit in a way that feels clean instead of cruel. Part one, why this lands so hard on therapists. So let me start with why you specifically feel this more than most people in most jobs. You didn't end up in this field by accident. The people who become therapists tend to be the people who were already attuned to everyone else in the room, often from a young age. Caring about how other people feel is not a skill that you picked up in graduate school. For many of us, it's closer to a personality structure that was in place long before we ever read a textbook. The work selected for it. Then your training sharpened it, and you learn to track the smallest shifts in someone's face to notice discomfort before the person naming it does, and to move forward, distress rather than away from it. So those are the instincts that make you good in the room. They are also the instincts that make a limit feel like a betrayal of who you actually are. Because to a finely tuned helper, a boundary can register as the deliberate creation of someone else's discomfort. When you hold a cancellation fee and the client is unhappy, the part of you that has spent a lifetime smoothing things over reads that unhappiness as evidence that you did something wrong. You did not do something wrong. You did something necessary. And the discomfort that you're actually feeling is not a moral signal. It's just the friction of doing a thing that you were trained your whole life to avoid. Part two, the false choice. So here's the belief underneath the whole problem. And I want to say it plainly so that we can look at it. Somewhere along the way, a lot of therapists absorbed the idea that kindness and limits are opposites. That to be warm, you must be available. That to be caring, you must be flexible. And that every limit is a small withdrawal of love. And the more limits you set, the colder you become. That belief is wrong. And it's worth understanding why. A limit is not the absence of care. A limit is one of the forms care takes. So when you tell a client clearly what the fee is, when the session will end, and how to reach you between sessions, you aren't pushing them away. You're giving them a structure that they can actually rely on. So people relax inside structures they can predict, and a relationship with no edges is not a warmer relationship. It's a more anxious one because nobody can feel where the ground is. The therapists who burn out are very often the warmest ones, the ones who couldn't bear to hold a line. So the warmth was real. The problem was that they had been taught warmth meant having no limits. So they gave and gave until there was nothing left to give warmly. So you don't have to choose between being kind and being clear. You were only ever told you did. So part three, the cost of not holding the line. I want to be honest about what happens when you let the guilt win, because the cost is real and it's rarely dramatic enough to notice in the moment. But boundary erosion almost never arrives as one big failure. It arrives as a series of small accommodations, each of which seems reasonable on its own. A late cancellation gets waived because the reason sounds valid, and then it gets waived again because the precedent is set. And after hours text gets answered because the client seems distressed, and then the texts continue because the expectation now exists, and the fee stays flat because raising it feels uncomfortable. And then it stays flat longer because the conversation has been avoided long enough that it starts to feel impossible. So none of those decisions feels significant when you make it. The pattern they build together is very significant. Therapists who feel chronically overextended and underpaid are usually not looking at one bad decision. They're looking at the accumulation of dozens of small ones, none of which felt like much at the time. There is a clinical cost too, and this is the part that I want you to hear. A therapist who is quietly resentful is a therapist who is slightly less present. And the resentment doesn't stay politely contained in the business layer of the practice. It seeps into the room as a small flatness, a reduced engagement that clients can often feel even when they can't actually name it. So the therapist who undercharges and overgives tells herself that she is being generous. And meanwhile, she is bringing a little less of herself to every client because there is a little less of her to bring. Holding your limits is not the selfish version of this work. It's what keeps you available enough to do the work well. Part 4, set the limit in the frame, not the moment. So now the part that actually makes this easier, because I don't want to leave you with a feeling to manage and no method. So the single biggest reason a limit feels like rejection is that it gets set in the moment as a reaction to something that the client did. When a client texts you on a Saturday and you respond 2 days later with a new boundary about weekend contact, the client experiences a change. Something that they were allowed to do is suddenly being taken away, and it's being taken away in response to them, which makes it feel personal. And that's the version that makes you the bad guy. So the fix is to move the limit upstream. A limit you set in advance is information. A limit you set in the moment feels like a punishment. So when your policies are clear from the consultation call, when your fee and your cancellation terms and your communication expectations are stated plainly before the work begins, the client is not being corrected and they are being orientated. So there is a world of difference between here is how my practice works, said at the start, and I need you to stop doing that, said after the fact. So this is why the boring administrative work matters more than it looks like it does. A clear intake, a written policy the client actually reads, a fee stated out loud without flinching. None of that is glamorous, and all of it does the emotional heavy lifting for you because it means most of your limits are already in place before anyone has the chance to push on them. The limit set in the frame protects the relationship. The limit improvised under pressure strains it. Part 5, the posture and the language. When you do have to state a limit out loud, your posture matters as much as your words. So let me give you both. The posture is warm and plain, not apologetic and not braced for a fight. The moment that you apologize for a reasonable limit, you signal that you're not sure that you're entitled to it. And the client picks that up immediately. You are entitled to it. You can be kind in your tone and completely clear in your content at the same time. And that combination is what tells a client that this is simply how things are, not a battle that your nervous system has to be nervous about. Or the language stays short. Something like, I want to be upfront about how I handle this so that there are no surprises later. Then state the limit, then stop. You don't need a paragraph of justification because justification invites negotiation. And a limit that you over explain starts to sound like one that you're willing to bargain on. Warmth lives in your tone and your willingness to acknowledge how the client feels about the limit. It doesn't require you to soften the limit itself until it disappears. If the client is disappointed, you're allowed to let them be disappointed. I understand this is not what you were hoping for, is a complete and caring response. It holds the limit and it honors the feeling and it doesn't collapse one into the other. And that's the whole skill. So, part 6, what you are actually modeling. I want to close on the reframe that makes all of this feel less like self protection and more like part of the work, because it is. Many of your clients struggle with exactly this. They can't hold a limit without guilt either. They overgive, they can't say no, they answer every text, they apologize for needing anything at all. And when you sit across from them and hold your own limit with steadiness and warmth, you're actually modeling and showing them something that they may have never seen in their lives. You're showing them that a person can keep a boundary and stay kind. That's a limit that does not end a relationship, that someone can be disappointed in you and the connections survives. You can't teach that if you're quietly abandoning your own limits the whole time. So children learn from what we do, not what we say, and clients are not so different. The way you hold your boundaries is one of the most honest things that you teach in the room. So holding the line is not a departure from good care. On a good day, it is the care. So if your limits feel shaky right now, and the real fix is almost never a sterner policy, it's building the financial and operational foundation underneath your practice so that your boundaries are settled in your own mind before a client ever tests one. That's a lot of the work that we go through in my foundations course, the Launch Lab, my program for therapists building a private practice in the first 90 days. You can find it at craftyourpractice.com/launch, and the link is in the description. And if this was useful, subscribe so that the next one finds you. And I'll see you in the next episode.